4 days after leaving the hospital, I was still moving like my body didn't fully belong to me. Everything felt delayed. My steps, my thoughts, even my reactions. Like I was underwater and the rest of the world was operating at full speed above me. The house smelled faintly like antiseptic and laundry detergent, this weird mix of trying to be clean but not quite managing it. There were folded towels stacked on the arm of the couch, a half-empty bottle of painkillers on the coffee table, and a glass of water I kept forgetting to drink. I wasn't supposed to be alone that morning. Mark had stood in the kitchen earlier, keys in hand, already halfway out the door before I even registered what he was saying. He barely looked at me when he said, "I just need to run out for a bit. I'll be back soon." His voice had that distracted tone, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. I remember staring at him, waiting for something more, some kind of acknowledgement. Maybe a kiss on the forehead? Something. But he just left. And I stayed there on the couch, wrapped in a blanket I hadn't bothered folding since I got home, trying to convince myself that this was normal, that husbands leave sometimes, that running out for a bit didn't have to mean anything. Except it did, because he took my car. That part didn't hit me immediately. It was only when I heard the engine start and the tires crunch over the gravel in the driveway that something inside me tightened. His car was still parked outside. Mine was the one pulling away. I remember sitting up a little too fast, my body protesting, and looking out the window. And there it was, my car disappearing down the street, sunlight flashing off the rear window like a signal I was too slow to catch. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe his tank was empty. Maybe he just grabbed the closer set of keys. Maybe I was overthinking because I hadn't slept properly in days. But then an hour passed, and then 2, and he didn't come back. I tried calling him around noon. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I just stared at my phone for a while, like maybe it would explain itself if I looked hard enough. I wasn't supposed to be stressing. The doctor had been very clear about that. "You need rest," she'd said, looking me straight in the eye like she knew I wouldn't listen. "Your body has been through enough." Enough. That word kept echoing in my head. I leaned back against the couch and closed my eyes, but my mind wouldn't slow down. It kept replaying everything from the past week. The hospital room, the sterile lights, the quiet conversations that felt heavier than they should have been. The way Mark had stood at the foot of the bed instead of next to me. The way he checked his phone more than he checked on me. There was something off even then. I just didn't have the energy to question it. By the time my phone buzzed again, it was almost 2 p.m. I grabbed it too quickly, my heart jumping in a way that felt embarrassing. But it wasn't him. It was a text, from an unknown number. For a second, I considered ignoring it. I didn't have the energy for spam or wrong numbers or whatever it was, but something about the timing made my chest tighten. So I opened it, and I wish I hadn't. It was a picture, blurry at first glance, like it had been taken quickly, but when I tapped on it and zoomed in, everything became painfully clear. It was my car, parked outside a bar.
And Mark was standing next to it. Except he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, close enough that their shoulders were touching, close enough that there was no space between them at all. Her hand was on his chest, fingers curled into his shirt like she belonged there. And he was looking down at her with this expression I hadn't seen in a long time, not since before everything changed. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like something inside me had physically snapped. I stared at the image, trying to convince myself it wasn't what it looked like, that maybe it was an old photo, that maybe there was some explanation that didn't make me feel like my entire world was tilting. But then another message came through. He said you were out of town. I didn't even realize I had stopped breathing until my chest started to ache. Out of town. That's what he told her, while I was sitting here, 4 days out of a hospital bed, barely able to stand for more than 10 minutes at a time. I read the message again, and again. Each time it felt sharper, like it was cutting deeper the more I tried to process it. My hands were shaking when I finally hit call. It rang longer this time, 5 times, 6. Then he answered. "Hey," he said, like nothing was wrong, like everything was completely normal. "What's up?" For a second, I couldn't speak. All the words I had in my head suddenly felt useless, too small to carry what I was feeling. "Where are you?" I finally managed. There was a pause, just a fraction of a second, but I heard it. "I told you, I'm just out running errands." Errands. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. "In my car?" Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Yeah, mine's low on gas." The lie came so easily. That's what hit me the hardest. Not just what he was doing, but how effortlessly he was doing it. "I got a picture," I said. Silence. Real silence this time. The kind that stretches and stretches until it becomes unbearable. "What picture?" he asked finally, but his voice had changed. It was tighter now, careful. "Don't do that," I said, my voice coming out softer than I expected. "Don't pretend." I could hear noise in the background, music, voices, laughter, the kind of atmosphere you don't get from running errands. "You're at a bar," I continued, "with a woman, in my car, while I'm at home trying to recover." There it was. I'd said it out loud, and somehow that made it more real than the picture ever could. He exhaled slowly. I could almost picture him running a hand through his hair, buying himself time. "It's not what you think," he said. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable, like he'd pulled that line from some script every cheating husband memorizes. "Then tell me what it is," I said. Another pause. Then, "She's just a friend." A friend, of course she was. The word felt hollow, meaningless. It didn't match the way she was touching him in that photo. It didn't match the way he'd lied about me being out of town. "Friends don't send pictures like that," I said quietly. "I didn't send it," he shot back. That stopped me. Of course he didn't, which meant she did. And suddenly the situation shifted in my mind. This wasn't just him sneaking around. This was someone else stepping in, pulling back the curtain, showing me something he had clearly intended to keep hidden. "Why would she send it to me?" I asked, more to myself than to him. "I don't know," he said quickly.
Too quickly. Maybe she's trying to cause drama. Drama. I felt something inside me harden at that word. "You told her I was out of town," I said, my voice steadier now, colder. He didn't respond. "That's not drama, Mark. That's a lie. A very specific one." "I didn't mean it like that," he said, but there was no conviction behind it. "Then how did you mean it?" He sighed, and I could hear the frustration creeping in now, like I was the problem for asking questions. "Look, I didn't want to get into everything with her. It was just easier to say you weren't around." Easier. Everything about this was easier for him, apparently. Leaving me alone, taking my car, lying about where I was, standing outside a bar with another woman while I was still trying to figure out how to move without pain. "Come home," I said. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even really a command. It was just something I needed. "I will," he said. "Just give me a little time." "Time for what?" I almost asked, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the exhaustion finally catching up. Maybe it was the realization that whatever he needed time for, it wasn't going to make this better. "Don't take too long," I said instead. I hung up before he could respond. Then I sat there, staring at my phone, the picture still open on the screen. My car, his hand brushing hers now that I looked closer. The way they were angled toward each other, like the rest of the world didn't exist. And for the first time since I got home from the hospital, the physical pain wasn't the worst part anymore. It was the waiting. Waiting for him to come back. Waiting to see what kind of story he'd tell when he walked through that door. Waiting to find out if the man I married was still somewhere in there, or if I'd already lost him a long time ago and just didn't want to admit it. I didn't move for a long time after I hung up. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't trust what I'd do if I did. My phone was still in my hand, the screen dimming and lighting back up again every time a new notification threatened to come in, but nothing else did. No follow-up message, no explanation, no apology, just silence. And that silence started to feel louder than anything he could have said. I forced myself to stand eventually, bracing one hand against the couch as my body reminded me I wasn't fully healed yet. Every step toward the kitchen felt heavier than it should have. I poured myself a glass of water, took a sip, then set it down untouched. My appetite, my thirst, all of it had been replaced by this tight, restless feeling under my ribs. I needed to do something. So I picked up my phone again and opened the message from the unknown number. I stared at it for a minute, my thumb hovering over the screen. This was a door I couldn't close once I opened it, and I knew that. But I also knew I couldn't just sit there and pretend I didn't want answers. So I typed, "Who is this?" The response came faster than I expected. "You don't know me, but I think you should." My stomach twisted. There was something about the way she wrote, calm, almost detached, that made it worse. Like this wasn't emotional for her. Like she'd already processed whatever this was, and now she was just informing me. "How do you have my number?" I asked. He gave it to me, said it was for emergencies. I let out a short, hollow breath. Of course he did. Of course, my number existed in his life as some kind of backup plan, something to hand out casually while I sat at home believing I was the only one in that space. "What's your name?" I typed. There was a pause this time. Not long, but long enough to feel deliberate. "Emily." I read it twice. Emily. Just a name. It didn't come with context or explanation, but somehow it felt like it carried weight anyway. like it had been sitting somewhere in the background of my life without me realizing it. "How long have you known him?" I asked. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Almost a year. A year. The word hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't some recent mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness or a bad decision that spiraled. This had time behind it. History. Consistency. A year meant this had been happening long before the hospital, long before anything that might have explained his distance over the past few weeks. A year meant I'd been living in something that wasn't real for a long time. "Does he know you're texting me?" I asked. "No." That didn't surprise me. "Why are you doing this?" There was a longer pause this time. I could almost feel her thinking, choosing her words carefully. "Because I didn't know about you." "Not really. He told me you were separated, that things were basically over." I closed my eyes, my grip tightening around the phone. Separated. Basically over. The phrases felt rehearsed, like he'd said them enough times to make them believable. "I found out that wasn't true," she continued, and I didn't like how that felt. So she reached out, not to confront him, to confront me. I didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. Maybe both. "He said you were out of town today," she added. That's when I knew something was off. I let out a shaky breath. "Out of town." The lie again, repeated like it was nothing. "I just got out of the hospital," I typed. The typing bubble popped up instantly this time. "What?" "4 days ago," I continued. "I'm not out of town. I'm at home, recovering." There was a long stretch of nothing after that, longer than any pause before. I imagined her reading it, rereading it, trying to fit that into whatever version of him she'd been given. "I didn't know," she finally replied. "I figured." Another pause. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I really am." I stared at those words, unsure what to do with them. They didn't fix anything. They didn't erase what I'd seen or what I was starting to understand. But they also didn't feel fake. "What exactly are you to him?" I asked. There it was, the question I'd been avoiding, even in my own head. Her answer came slower this time. "He's been seeing me, regularly. He stays over sometimes. We go out. He talks about the future." Each sentence felt like a small fracture spreading through something that was already breaking. "Does he wear his ring?" I asked. "No." Of course he didn't. "Did you ever come to our house?" I asked, my chest tightening. "No," she said quickly. "He always said that would complicate things." Complicate things. I almost laughed again, but the sound got stuck somewhere in my throat. I sank back down onto the couch, my body suddenly feeling heavier than before. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. It wasn't a single moment caught in a picture. It was a full, detailed reality that existed alongside my own without me ever seeing it. 2 lives. And I'd only been living in one of them. "Why send me the picture?"
I asked after a while. Another pause. "Because when I realized he lied about you, I needed to know the truth. And I figured you deserved to know too." Deserved. That word sat differently than sorry. I didn't want to be part of something like that, she added. Something like that. A marriage, a betrayal, a lie that stretched over a year. Before I could respond, I heard it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart jumped so hard it made my chest ache. "He's back," I typed quickly. "Okay," she replied. "I'm here if you need to ask anything else." I didn't respond. I just locked my phone and set it down on the table, my hands suddenly cold. The front door opened a few seconds later. "Hey," Mark called out, like he always did when he came home, like nothing had changed. I stayed where I was, sitting on the couch, my back straight now despite the discomfort. I wanted to see him, really see him. He walked into the living room a moment later, and for a split second, our eyes met. There was something different in his expression. Not guilt exactly, not even fear. It was more like calculation, like he was trying to read the room before deciding how to act. "Hey," he said again, softer this time. "How are you feeling?" The question almost made me snap. "I saw the picture," I said. No small talk, no pretending. His jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded, like he'd expected that. "Okay," he said. "Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it." Like this was a scheduling conflict. Like we were about to sit down and calmly discuss something that hadn't just shattered the last year of my life. I gestured vaguely toward the chair across from me. "Go ahead."
He sat down slowly, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. That familiar posture he used when he wanted to seem open, approachable. I told you, he started. It's not what it looks like. I held his gaze. Her name is Emily. That caught him off guard. I saw it immediately. The slight widening of his eyes, the way his posture shifted. She texted me, I continued. We talked. Now there it was. Real panic. What did she say? He asked quickly. I almost smiled at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was revealing. He wasn't asking how I felt. He wasn't asking what I thought. He wanted to know what information I had. She said you've been seeing her for almost a year. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. It's not like that. She said you told her we were separated. She said you stay over at her place. Listen. And you told her I was out of town today. I finished. The room went quiet. He looked at me, really looked at me this time, and I could see it. The moment he realized there wasn't a version of this conversation where he could talk his way out of it. I didn't know how to tell you, he said finally. There it was. Not denial, not even an attempt at it. Just that. I didn't know how to tell you. I felt something inside me go still. How long? I asked, even though I already knew. He hesitated, just for a second. About a year. Hearing it from him hit differently. It made it solid, undeniable. A year, I repeated. I didn't plan for it to go this far, he said quickly. It just happened. I stared at him. A year doesn't just happen. That's choices, over and over again. What about me? I asked quietly. He frowned slightly, like he didn't understand the question. What do you mean?
What about me while all of this was happening? I said. What was I to you? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, he didn't have an immediate answer. You're my wife, he said finally. The word felt empty. And she? I asked. He hesitated again. I don't know, he admitted. That might have been the most honest thing he'd said all day, and somehow it hurt more than everything else. I don't know. Those 3 words didn't just land, they settled in like something permanent, heavy, unmovable. I kept staring at him, waiting for something else to follow, some correction, some clarification, but nothing came, just silence. And suddenly, everything about him felt unfamiliar. The way he sat there, the way his hands were clasped together like he was trying to contain something, the way his eyes avoided mine for just a second too long. It all felt like I was looking at someone I used to know. You don't know, I repeated, slower this time. He exhaled, like he was already tired of the conversation. I mean, it's complicated. No, I said, shaking my head slightly. It's not. You made it complicated. That hit him. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened again, the way his shoulders shifted like he was bracing himself. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said, and there it was again. That same line, that same attempt to reduce a year of choices into something accidental. I leaned back against the couch, my body aching but my mind suddenly very clear. Stop saying that, I said quietly. He blinked. What? Stop acting like this just fell into your lap, like you slipped and accidentally built another relationship behind my back. He didn't respond right away, and for the first time since he walked in, I felt like I had control of the conversation. You told her we were separated, I continued. You stayed at her place. You gave her my number as an emergency contact. You took my car to go see her while I'm recovering from the hospital. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That's not confusion, Mark. That's commitment. He looked down at his hands, rubbing his thumb against his palm like he always did when he didn't know what to say. I didn't think it would blow up like this, he muttered. I let out a slow breath. That's because you didn't think I'd find out. Another silence. He didn't deny it. That was the part that made my chest feel tight again. Not the lies, not even the betrayal, but how quickly the truth settled in once it was exposed. Like there was no real fight left in him to protect whatever version of our marriage he'd been pretending to maintain. Why now? I asked. He looked up. What do you mean? You've had a year, I said. A whole year to say something, to end it, to choose. Why didn't you? He hesitated, then leaned back in the chair, his expression shifting into something more defensive.
Because things weren't good between us, he said. There it was. I almost expected it. The shift, the redirect. Things weren't good, I repeated, nodding slightly. So your solution was to start a whole second relationship? It wasn't like that, he said quickly. It started small, just talking. I felt, I don't know, seen, I guess. Seen. The word stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. And you didn't feel seen by me? I asked. He hesitated again. Not lately. Not lately. I let that sit for a second. Not because I didn't have a response, but because I wanted him to hear how empty that sounded.
I was in the hospital, Mark, I said finally, 4 days ago. Whatever you felt before that doesn't justify what you did during it. I was there, he said quickly, almost defensively. I came to see you every day. You stood at the foot of the bed, I said. You checked your phone more than you looked at me. You left early every night. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Were you going to see her after? I asked. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside me again. Not anger this time, something colder, more defined. Did she know about the hospital? I asked. No, he said immediately. I didn't tell her that. Of course he didn't. Because that would have made you look bad, I said. That's not because it would have made it real, I cut in. Harder to pretend like you weren't doing something wrong. He ran a hand over his face, clearly frustrated now. What do you want me to say? The question hung in the air, and for a moment I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't want words anymore. Not from him. Not explanations, not excuses, not even apologies. All of it felt too late. I want you to be honest, I said finally, for once. I am being honest. No, I said, shaking my head again. You're reacting. That's different. He stared at me, his expression tightening. What does that even mean? It means you're only telling the truth now because you got caught, I said. If she hadn't sent that picture, would you have ever told me? He didn't respond. Again, the pattern was starting to feel predictable. I leaned forward slightly, ignoring the discomfort in my body. Answer me. He looked away, toward the window this time. I don't know. There it was again. That phrase, that shield. I felt something inside me finally snap into place. You do know, I said quietly. You just don't want to say it. He shook his head, but it wasn't convincing. It's not that simple. It is, I said. You didn't tell me because you didn't want to lose what you had. Not with me, not with her. That landed. I saw it in the way his posture stiffened, the way his eyes flickered back to mine. You wanted both, I continued, and you thought you could manage it. That's not fair, he said, but his voice lacked any real force. Fair? I repeated, a slight edge creeping in now. You're talking about fair? I'm just saying... No, you're not saying anything, I cut him off again. You're avoiding. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls were closing in around the truth that neither of us could ignore anymore. Are you in love with her? I asked. The question came out before I could stop it, and the second it was out there, everything went still. He froze, completely. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment I thought he might actually answer right away, but he didn't. Seconds passed, then more. I care about her, he said finally. That wasn't what I asked. I didn't ask if you care about her, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I asked if you're in love with her. He swallowed, his throat moving visibly. I don't know, he said again, and this time I couldn't take it. I let out a short, sharp laugh, the sound cutting through the tension like something breaking. Of course you don't, I said, leaning back again. That's your answer for everything. He looked at me, something like frustration and guilt mixing together on his face. What do you want me to say? I want you to stop hiding behind that, I said. You've had a year to figure it out. I didn't expect it to turn into this, he said. And yet it did, I replied, and you stayed. Another silence. Then, quieter this time, I asked, Are you going to keep seeing her? He hesitated again, but this time it was different. Not uncertainty, not confusion, decision. I don't know, he said, but I saw it, the truth behind the words, and that was enough. Because in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully let myself see before. He wasn't trying to fix this. He wasn't trying to fight for us. He was trying to keep his options open. And suddenly, everything became very, very clear. That realization didn't hit like a wave. It didn't crash or overwhelm me the way I expected something like that would. It settled in slowly, like something cold seeping through the cracks, steady and undeniable. He was sitting right in front of me, and I could already feel the distance. Not physical distance, something deeper than that. The kind that builds quietly over time, and then one day, you realize you can't reach the other person anymore, no matter how far you stretch. "I think you should go," I said. The words came out calmer than I felt, but they didn't shake, not even a little. He blinked, like he wasn't sure he'd heard me right. "What?" "I think you should go," I repeated. "Not for a few hours, not to cool off. I mean, leave." His expression shifted, something defensive rising up again. "You're kicking me out?" I held his gaze. "I'm asking for space, and I don't think that's unreasonable." "For how long?" he asked. I shrugged slightly, ignoring the pull in my side. "I don't know. Long enough for me to not feel like this." "That's not really an answer," he said, a hint of irritation creeping in. "Neither is I don't know, but that didn't stop you from using it all day," I replied. That shut him up for a second. He leaned back in the chair, exhaling like this was somehow exhausting for him, like he was the one being pushed past his limits. "I don't think leaving is going to fix anything," he said. "It's not about fixing anything right now," I said. "It's about me being able to breathe in my own house." That landed harder than I expected. I saw it in his face, the slight flicker of something that almost looked like guilt, but it passed quickly. "So what, you just want me to disappear?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want you to be honest about what you've already done. You've already been living somewhere else part-time. This just makes it official." He looked away, his jaw tightening again. "I didn't move in with her," he said. I almost smiled, but it wasn't out of amusement. "You didn't have to." Silence. The truth didn't need much explaining at that point. He stood up slowly, pacing a couple of steps like he needed to burn off the tension building inside him. "This is a lot," he muttered. I watched him, trying to see him clearly. Not the version I'd been holding on to, not the one I married, but the one standing in front of me right now. "Yeah," I said. "It is." He stopped pacing and looked at me again. "You're not even going to try to work through this?" The question almost caught me off guard. "Work through what?" I asked. "This," he said, gesturing vaguely between us. "Our marriage." I stared at him for a second, genuinely trying to understand how he could ask that right now.
"You've been in another relationship for a year," I said slowly. "You lied to both of us. You showed up for me halfway, if that. And now you're asking if I'm going to try? I'm here, aren't I?" he said, a little sharper now. I shook my head. "No, you're here because you got caught." That hit harder than anything else I'd said so far. I could see it in the way his expression tightened, the way his shoulders stiffened. "That's not fair," he said again. "You keep using that word," I replied quietly. "I don't think it means what you think it means anymore." Another silence stretched between us, thicker this time. He looked like he wanted to argue, to push back, but he didn't have anything solid to stand on. "What do you want from me?" he asked finally, his voice lower now. It was a different tone, less defensive, more uncertain. I considered the question for a moment. "I want you to leave," I said again, "and I want you to figure out what you actually want. Not what's convenient, not what's easy, what you actually want." He frowned slightly. "And what about you?" I held his gaze. "I'm going to do the same." That seemed to catch him off guard more than anything else. "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means I'm not going to sit here and wait for you to decide between me and someone else," I said. "I'm not an option on a list." His eyes flickered, like that hit something deeper than the rest. "I never said you were," he muttered. "You didn't have to," I replied. "You showed me." The room went quiet again. He looked around for a second, like he was seeing the space differently now. The couch, the kitchen, the hallway leading to the bedroom, it all carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "This is really happening," he said, almost to himself. I didn't respond, because yes, it was.
and it had been for a long time. We just hadn't said it out loud yet. He ran a hand through his hair again, then nodded slowly, like he was coming to some kind of reluctant acceptance. "Okay," he said, "I'll go." The words felt final in a way I hadn't expected. Even though I was the one who asked for it, hearing him agree made something in my chest tighten again. "Take what you need," I added. "Clothes, whatever." He hesitated. "Should I come back later for the rest?" I thought about it for a second. The idea of him walking in and out of the house like nothing had changed made my stomach turn. "No," I said. "Text me first. We'll figure it out." He nodded again. Then he turned and walked toward the bedroom. I stayed on the couch, listening to the sounds of drawers opening, hangers shifting, footsteps moving back and forth. Each noise felt louder than it should have, like it was echoing through something fragile. This was real. This was actually happening. I leaned back slowly, closing my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself. My body still ached, still reminded me that I wasn't at full strength, but somehow that felt distant compared to everything else. After a few minutes, my phone buzzed again. I opened my eyes and reached for it. "Emily, are you okay?" I stared at the message for a second, unsure how to answer that. Was I okay? I just asked my husband to leave after finding out he'd been living a double life for a year. No, I wasn't okay, but I also wasn't falling apart the way I thought I would. I told him to leave, I typed back. There was a pause, then her reply came through. "Wow. Yeah, that felt about right."
"He's packing now," I added. Another pause. "I didn't expect this to happen today," she wrote. "Neither did I." We both sat in that reality for a second, even through the distance of a phone screen. "Can I ask you something?" she sent. I hesitated, then typed, "Sure. Do you still want him?" The question hit differently than anything else she'd said. Not accusatory, not defensive, just direct. I looked toward the hallway, where I could still hear him moving around, gathering pieces of his life like they were just objects he could carry out in a bag. Did I still want him? I thought about the man I married, the one who used to sit with me on the porch late at night, talking about nothing and everything, the one who used to reach for my hand without thinking, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And then I thought about the man in the picture, the one standing next to another woman, looking at her in a way that didn't leave room for doubt, the one who said, "I don't know," like it was enough. "I don't know," I typed back. The irony of it didn't escape me, but for once, it felt honest. A few minutes later, Mark walked back into the living room. He had a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, another one in his hand. He stopped a few feet away from me, like he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to get anymore. "I'll text you," he said. I nodded. He stood there for another second like he was waiting for something, a different reaction, a last-minute change of heart, but it didn't come. So he turned and walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, then looked back at me one last time. "Take care of yourself," he said. I almost laughed again, but this time it stayed quiet. "Yeah," I replied. "You too." And then he left. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but it felt louder than anything else that day. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the space he'd just occupied. The air felt different, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. Empty, but not the kind of empty that begs to be filled, the kind that forces you to sit with it. My phone buzzed again in my hand. "Emily, is he gone?" I looked at the door, then back at the screen. "Yeah," I typed. Another pause. Then, "He just texted me." My chest tightened slightly. "Of course he did," I replied. A few seconds later, another message came through. He says he needs to talk to me, that things are complicated now. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head slightly. There it was again. Complicated. "I'm sure they are," I typed. I stared at the screen for a second, then added, "What are you going to do?" The typing bubble appeared almost immediately this time, and for some reason I had a feeling that whatever she said next was going to change everything.